In the year 1283, within the stone walls of a monastery perched above the river Tyne, a scribe named Oswald tended to his life's work with the same unhurried care he had shown for 27 years. Good evening. I am grateful you are here tonight. Tonight's story will carry us to a monastery scriptorium in northern England, where we will follow Oswald through the gentle rhythm of his copying work. Let yourself settle in, get comfortable, and know that there is nowhere else you need to be. This story will be here, unfolding slowly for as long as you need. Oswald, 41 years old, sat at his desk by the eastern window. His ink-stained fingers rested against the edge of the wooden writing surface, worn smooth by decades of other scribes who had worked at this same spot. The morning light filtered through the narrow opening, casting a pale stripe across the vellum sheet before him. His graying auburn hair caught the illumination as he bent forward to examine the page he had completed the previous afternoon. The scriptorium held the quiet that comes before the full awakening of a monastery. Somewhere beyond the thick walls, bells would ring eventually for prime, but that hour had not yet arrived. The chamber around him breathed with stillness. 3 other writing desks stood empty, their surfaces bare and ready for the day's work. The scent of old parchment filled the air, mingled with the faint aroma of beeswax from candles that had burned late into the previous evening. Oswald hummed a plain chant melody while preparing his workspace, a habit that had accompanied his morning routine for more years than he could recall. The tune was barely audible, more a vibration in his throat than actual sound, but it steadied his hands and focused his mind. He reached for the wooden case that held his pens and selected one with a medium nib, testing its flexibility against his thumb. The quill responded with just the right amount of give. His current project lay open before him, a gospel text he had been copying for the past 3 months. The original manuscript, borrowed from the cathedral at Durham, rested on a slanted reading stand to his left. Each letter required attention, each line demanded precision, yet the work never felt burdensome. Oswald had discovered long ago that patience was not something he needed to summon. It simply inhabited him the way warmth inhabited a hearthstone. The ink in his horn sat ready, dark and thick. He had mixed it himself 2 days earlier, using the recipe taught to him by Brother Anselm, the monastery's master illuminator. Oak galls ground fine, mixed with rainwater and iron salts, then allowed to steep. The result was a black that would last centuries if the work was done properly. Oswald dipped his pen, touched the excess against the horn's rim, and brought the nib to the page. His hand moved across the vellum with deliberate grace. Each downstroke received the same measured pressure. Each curve flowed with identical smoothness. The letters emerged in a script that was neither rushed nor hesitant, but perfectly steady. He completed one line, then another, the pen making the softest whisper as it traveled across the treated skin. When he paused to refresh the ink, he flexed his ink-stained fingers and returned immediately to the work, his graying auburn hair falling slightly forward as he leaned closer to examine a particularly intricate letter. By the time the bells rang for prime, Oswald had completed half a page. He set down his pen with care, wiped the nib clean with a scrap of wool, and stood slowly. His knees gave their usual protest after sitting, but the discomfort was mild and familiar. He made his way from the Scriptorium, his footsteps barely audible on the worn stone floor of the corridor. The monastery chapel held the accumulated warmth of many bodies gathered in a cold space. Oswald took his customary place in the choir, fourth position from the right, and let his voice join the others in the morning psalms. The chant rose and fell in waves, each monk contributing his part to the whole. Sunlight had begun to strengthen outside, and thin beams penetrated the narrow windows, illuminating particles of dust that drifted like tiny stars through the nave. When the service concluded, the brothers filed toward the refectory for the morning meal. The hall smelled of oat porridge and fresh bread, simple fare but sufficient. Oswald sat beside Brother Edmund, a younger monk who worked in the herbarium. They ate in companionable silence, as was the custom during morning meals, but Edmund's presence was soothing in its predictability. The younger man always broke his bread in the same way, always stirred his porridge 3 times before eating, and always folded his hands in exactly the same manner when he finished. After the meal, Oswald returned to his desk. The scriptorium was filled with other scribes now. Brother Cuthbert worked at the desk nearest the door, his pen scratching rapidly as he copied a land charter. Brother Martin occupied the desk by the south wall, illuminating a psalter with careful applications of gold leaf. The room hummed with quiet industry, each man absorbed in his particular task. Oswald resumed his position, 41 years old, with ink-stained fingers that knew every aspect of this work. He hummed his plain chant melody softly as he picked up his pen and found his place on the page. The gospel text waited with infinite patience for his attention. He dipped the nib, steadied his breathing, and continued where he had paused. The hours passed with the peculiar elasticity of time spent in deep concentration. Morning shifted toward midday, though Oswald barely registered the change. Light moved across his desk, warming first the left edge of his workspace, then gradually sliding toward the center. The temperature in the scriptorium rose slightly as the sun climbed higher, and he pushed back the sleeves of his habit to let air reach his forearms. A particular word required careful attention, and Oswald slowed even further to ensure accuracy. The original manuscript showed somewhere at this point, and he needed to interpret a letter that had faded slightly. He studied it for several long breaths, comparing it to similar letters elsewhere on the page, and finally made his judgment. The pen moved with confidence once his decision was made. Brother Cuthbert rose from his desk and departed, his charter work apparently complete for the morning. The absence of his pen's scratching created a small pocket of additional quiet. Brother Martin continued his illumination work, occasionally making a soft sound of satisfaction when a detail pleased him. Oswald appreciated these small human sounds that punctuated the silence without disturbing it. His stomach gave a gentle reminder that the midday meal approached, but he wanted to finish the current section before stopping. 3 more lines would bring him to a natural break in the text, a place where he could pause without disrupting the flow of his work when he returned. His hand maintained its steady rhythm, each letter emerging with the same careful formation as those that preceded it. The bells for sext rang across the monastery grounds. Oswald completed his final letter, examined the page with a critical but satisfied eye, and cleaned his pen once more. He stood, stretched carefully, and followed Brother Martin toward the refectory. His ink-stained fingers bore witness to the morning's labor, and his graying auburn hair needed smoothing. But these small irregularities in his appearance bothered him not at all. The afternoon meal consisted of bread, cheese, and ale, with spring greens gathered from the monastery garden. Oswald ate slowly, savoring each bite without particular attachment to the flavors. The food nourished him, and that was sufficient. Around him, other brothers did the same, their faces showing the peaceful weariness of men engaged in meaningful work. When the meal concluded, Oswald made his way back through the cloister, pausing briefly where sunlight pooled on the stone walkway. The warmth soaked into his shoulders, easing muscles that had held the same position for hours. A breeze carried the scent of turned earth from the garden, where Brother Timothy could be seen kneeling between rows of newly planted herbs. The sight pleased Oswald in a way that required no examination, simply a quiet recognition of order and continuity. The Scriptorium welcomed him back with its familiar atmosphere. Brother Martin had not yet returned, leaving Oswald alone in the chamber for the moment. He settled onto his bench, 41 years old, and arranged his workspace with movements that had become nearly automatic over the decades. The ink needed stirring after sitting idle, and he used a small wooden rod to blend any separation that had occurred. The consistency satisfied him, neither too thick nor too thin. His page weighted exactly as he had left it. Oswald hummed his plain chant melody while reviewing what he had written that morning, checking each line for errors he might have missed in the moment of creation. The letters stood even and clear, the spacing proper, the ink a beautiful deep black against the pale vellum. He found no mistakes, which brought him a measure of quiet contentment that settled in his chest like a warm stone. The afternoon light differed from the morning's illumination. It entered from a slightly different angle, casting softer shadows across his desk. Oswald appreciated this shift, the way it changed the character of his workspace without disrupting his ability to see clearly. He positioned the original manuscript on its stand, located his place in the text, and dipped his pen to begin again. His ink-stained fingers guided the quill with the same measured precision as before. The gospel passage he was copying told of a wedding feast, and the words flowed with their own gentle rhythm. Oswald let the meaning of the text rest lightly in his awareness as he worked, neither ignoring the content nor dwelling on it to the point of distraction. The words passed from the original page through his eyes, his mind, his hand, and onto the new vellum in a process that felt less like copying and more like careful transmission. Brother Martin returned and resumed his illumination work. The soft sound of his breathing and the occasional tiny clink of his tools created a pleasant backdrop to Oswald's concentration. The two men had worked together in this chamber for 15 years, and their rhythms had learned to complement each other. When Martin paused to mix a new shade of pigment, Oswald found himself naturally pausing as well to refresh his ink, though neither man acknowledged this synchronization. A fly entered through the window and circled the room twice before settling on the edge of Brother Martin's desk. It cleaned its front legs with meticulous care, then flew away again, out into the spring afternoon. Oswald watched it depart, his pen hovering above the page, and felt a momentary kinship with the creature's simple purposefulness. Then he returned his attention to the next word, the next letter, the next carefully formed curve of ink on vellum. The hours accumulated like rainwater in a barrel, slowly and without fanfare. Oswald completed 2 more sections of text, bringing him nearly to the end of a full page. His progress satisfied him not because it was swift, but because it was steady. Tomorrow he would continue, and the day after that, and the day following, until the entire gospel had been transferred from the borrowed manuscript to this new copy that would remain in their monastery's small library. Brother Cuthbert returned to the Scriptorium carrying a fresh sheet of vellum. He settled at his desk and began preparing it for writing, scraping away any remaining imperfections with a curved blade. The sound was gentle and rhythmic, a soft scratching that blended with the other quiet noises of the chamber. Oswald found it soothing, this evidence of preparation and craft happening alongside his own work. The light began its slow decline toward evening. Shadows stretched longer across the scriptorium floor, and the temperature dropped slightly, though not enough to cause discomfort. Oswald completed his current line and decided to finish the page before stopping for the day. 6 more lines remained, a quantity he could accomplish before Vespers if he maintained his usual pace. His hand moved with undiminished steadiness despite the day's labor. Each letter received the same attention as the first he had formed that morning. The ink flowed smoothly, the vellum accepted it without resistance, and the work progressed toward completion. When he formed the final letter of the page, Oswald set down his pen and allowed himself a moment of simple observation. The page before him represented a full day's work, and it was good work, careful and clear. Brother Martin stood and stretched, his back making a soft popping sound. He smiled at Oswald, a gentle expression that required no words, and began cleaning his tools in preparation for evening prayers. Oswald did the same, wiping his pen thoroughly and replacing it in its wooden case. He covered the ink horn with a scrap of leather to keep dust from settling on the surface overnight. His ink-stained fingers performed these tasks with practiced efficiency, and his graying auburn hair caught the fading light as he bent to tuck his stool beneath the desk. The 3 scribes departed the scriptorium together, moving through corridors that had grown dim in the approaching dusk. Torches burned at intervals along the walls, their flames dancing in drafts that moved through the stone passages. The scent of burning pitch mingled with the ever-present smell of old stone and the faint mustiness of ancient tapestries hanging in the chapter house. In the chapel, Oswald took his place in the choir once more. The Vespers service unfolded with the same measured grace as every evening service before it. The chants rose toward the vaulted ceiling, and Oswald added his voice to the collective sound, neither louder nor softer than necessary, simply present and contributing his part. Candlelight flickered across the faces of his brothers, illuminating expressions of quiet devotion and peaceful weariness. After the service, the community gathered for the evening meal. The refectory had been lit with additional candles, creating pools of warm light on the long wooden tables. Tonight's fare included fish from the river, baked with herbs from the garden, and coarse bread still slightly warm from the oven. Oswald ate with appreciation, his body welcoming the nourishment after a day spent mostly in stillness. Brother Edmund, seated beside him again, had a small scratch on his hand from working among thorny plants. It was nothing serious, merely a thin red line across his knuckle, but Oswald noticed it with the gentle attention he brought to small details. Edmund seemed unconcerned, eating his meal with the same focused contentment he brought to all his activities. The younger monk's presence continued to provide its quiet comfort, a reminder that their community functioned as a whole, each member supporting the others through simple proximity and shared purpose. When the meal ended, the brothers were granted a brief period of free time before complying the final prayers of the day. Some walked in the cloister, some sat in the warming room, some returned to their cells for private prayer or reading. Oswald chose to walk, moving slowly around the covered walkway that bordered the central garth. The evening air held a coolness that refreshed him after the day spent indoors, and he breathed it deeply. Stars had begun to appear in the darkening sky above the open courtyard. Oswald, 41 years old, paused to observe them, his ink-stained fingers clasped loosely behind his back. The constellations were old friends, appearing in their appointed places with reassuring regularity. He knew their names and their stories, taught to him by an elderly brother long since dead, and their presence overhead connected him to a continuity that stretched far beyond his own lifetime. The bells rang for Compline, and Oswald returned to the chapel. The final service of the day carried a particular quality of completion, a sense of the circle closing before beginning again with the next dawn. The monks' voices rose in the darkness, accompanied only by the flickering of candles that would soon be extinguished. Oswald sang the familiar words, feeling them settle into his bones with the weight of countless repetitions. After complaining, silence descended on the monastery. The Great Silence it was called, the period from nightfall until morning when speech was forbidden except in cases of emergency. Oswald appreciated this time, when even the small sounds of conversation ceased and the community moved through the buildings like spirits, barely disturbing the air. He made his way to his cell, a small room containing a narrow bed, a chest for his few possessions, and a small wooden cross on the wall. He prepared for sleep with simple efficiency, removing his habit and folding it carefully before placing it in the chest. The linen shift he wore beneath served as his sleeping garment. He knelt beside the bed for a few moments of private prayer, not requesting anything specific, simply resting in the presence of the divine as he understood it. Then he rose, settled onto the straw mattress, and pulled the wool blanket up to his shoulders. The darkness in his cell was nearly complete, broken only by faint starlight entering through the small window near the ceiling. Oswald lay on his back, his body grateful for the horizontal position after the day's sitting. His muscles released their held tension gradually, each part of him settling into rest. He could hear the distant sound of wind moving through the trees beyond the monastery walls, a soft rushing that formed a backdrop to the deeper silence. Sleep came to him easily, as it usually did. He had lived this rhythm for so many years that his body knew when to wake and when to rest without conscious instruction. His breathing deepened and slowed, and his consciousness drifted into the gentler realm of dreams, where he sometimes found himself still at his desk, still forming letters with infinite care, still participating in the great work of preserving and transmitting knowledge. The night passed in its own time, unmarked by bells or human activity. The monastery rested, its stone walls holding the warmth accumulated during the day and slowly releasing it into the cold spring darkness. In his cell, Oswald slept peacefully, his ink-stained fingers relaxed against the blanket, his breathing steady and deep. Dawn approached with gradual lightening of the sky, though full sunrise remained distant. The bells rang for matins, the first prayers of the new day, and Oswald woke immediately, his eyes opening without reluctance or confusion. He rose, dressed in the darkness, and made his way to the chapel where his brothers were already gathering. Their faces showed the softness of recent sleep, but their voices, when they began to chant, carried strength and clarity. After matins, the monks returned to their cells for a few hours of additional rest before lauds at sunrise. Oswald lay down again and drifted into a lighter sleep, more a deep relaxation than true unconsciousness. When the bells rang for lauds, he rose for the second time, feeling thoroughly rested and ready for another day's work. The sunrise service filled the chapel with gradually strengthening light. Oswald watched it grow through the eastern windows, the colors shifting from deep blue to purple to rose to gold. By the time the service concluded, full daylight had arrived, and the monastery emerged into another spring morning. The air carried the scent of damp earth and growing things, and birds sang in the trees beyond the walls. In the refectory, Oswald broke his fast with porridge and bread, the simple food warming his stomach and preparing his body for the day ahead. Brother Edmund sat beside him once more, the scratch on his hand already beginning to heal. The younger monk's quiet presence continued to provide its gentle companionship, requiring nothing, offering simple solidarity. Oswald returned to the Scriptorium to find it empty of other workers. The early morning hours often belonged to him alone, a circumstance he appreciated without preferring it over the companionable presence of his fellow scribes. Both solitude and company had their place in the rhythm of his days. He settled at his desk, 41 years old with graying auburn hair and ink-stained fingers, and hummed his plain chant melody while preparing his materials. A new page of vellum waited to receive the continuation of his gospel text. Oswald had prepared this sheet himself 2 days earlier, scraping it smooth and treating it with pumice until it gleamed pale and perfect. He positioned it on his desk with care, aligning it properly with the edge of the writing surface. The original manuscript resumed its place on the reading stand, open to the passage where he would begin. His pen, freshly trimmed the previous evening, needed no additional preparation. The ink required stirring, and he attended to this small task with the same care he brought to all aspects of his work. When everything stood ready, he sat quietly for a moment, his hands resting on the desk, his breathing slow and even. This brief pause had become part of his routine, a moment of gathering before beginning, a threshold between preparation and execution. Then he dipped his pen and began to write. The first letter emerged perfectly formed, its curves and straight lines exactly balanced. The second followed, then the third, and soon he had completed the first line of the new page. His hand moved with its customary steadiness, neither faster nor slower than the day before, simply maintaining the pace that allowed him to work without strain or error. Brother Martin entered the Scriptorium and took his place at his own desk. The illuminator nodded to Oswald, a silent morning greeting, and began arranging his pigments and brushes. Soon the room held the gentle sounds of two craftsmen at work, each absorbed in his own task, but aware of the other's presence in a way that enhanced rather than disturbed concentration. The morning progressed through its customary stages. Light strengthened and moved across the room, warming different sections of the floor and walls as the sun climbed higher. Oswald completed 3 sections of text, his ink-stained fingers guiding the pen with unwavering precision. When his hand began to tire slightly, he paused to flex it, working the stiffness from his joints before continuing. His graying auburn hair needed occasional smoothing when it fell forward, but these small interruptions barely registered in his awareness. Brother Cuthbert arrived before the bells for terce, carrying a manuscript that needed copying for the monastery's records. He settled at his desk with a soft sigh of contentment, clearly pleased to return to this work after other duties had kept him away. The Scriptorium now held its full complement of regular workers, and the atmosphere deepened into the particular quality of shared industry that Oswald found most conducive to his own efforts. The morning service of terce interrupted their work briefly. The 3 scribes made their way to the chapel, joined the other brothers in prayer, and returned to their tasks without unnecessary delay. This rhythm of work and worship, structured the days into a pattern that Oswald found deeply satisfying. Each element supported the other, the prayers preparing him for focused labor, the labor making his prayers more genuine and grounded. By midday, Oswald had completed another full page. The vellum now bore neat columns of text, each letter clearly formed, each line straight and properly spaced. He examined his work with careful attention, checking for any errors that might have escaped his notice during the actual writing. Finding none, he felt that quiet contentment settle in his chest once more, the simple satisfaction of work done well. The midday meal provided welcome nourishment and a brief respite from the stillness of sitting. Oswald ate his portion of bread and cheese, drank his ale, and listened to the reading that accompanied the meal, a passage from the writings of Saint Benedict. The words washed over him like gentle rain, their wisdom familiar but still capable of revealing new facets when approached with an open mind. The afternoon found Oswald returning once more to his desk, his body settling into the familiar position with ease born of long practice. Brother Martin had already resumed his illumination work, and the delicate scent of egg tempera mixed with pigment drifted across the scriptorium. Oswald appreciated this smell, the way it signaled his companion's presence and progress without requiring any exchange of words. He turned to a fresh section of the Gospel, one that would require particular attention due to several names that appeared in the text. Names demanded precision, as even a small error in spelling could alter meaning or cause confusion for future readers. Oswald studied the original manuscript carefully, noting each letter of the unfamiliar names before beginning to copy them onto his own page. His ink-stained fingers held the pen with gentle firmness as he formed the first name, taking extra time to ensure each letter matched the original exactly. The process slowed his usual rhythm, but he felt no impatience with this necessity. The work would take as long as it required, and rushing would only increase the likelihood of mistakes. He completed the name, compared it once more to the original, and continued with the surrounding text. Brother Timothy appeared in the doorway of the Scriptorium, his hands bearing the earthy smell of the garden. He approached Brother Martin quietly and placed a small bunch of fresh lavender on the illuminator's desk, a gesture of simple kindness that required no acknowledgement. Martin glanced up, smiled his gentle smile, and nodded his thanks. Timothy departed as quietly as he had come, leaving behind the clean scent of the herb mingling with the other smells of the chamber. Oswald hummed his plain chant melody softly while continuing his work. The tune carried him through the careful transcription of another difficult passage, his attention focused entirely on the movement of the pen across the vellum. When he reached the end of a particularly complex section, he paused to rest his hand and noticed that his shoulders had tensed slightly with concentration. He rolled them back carefully, releasing the tightness, and took several deep breaths before resuming. The light shifted as clouds moved across the sky outside. The change was subtle, a softening of the brightness without actual dimming, and it brought a different quality to the Scriptorium. Oswald found he could see his work equally well in this altered light, perhaps even slightly better, as the reduced glare eased the strain on his eyes. He continued writing, grateful for this small mercy of changing weather. Brother Cuthbert completed his charter work and began preparing a fresh sheet of vellum for his next task. The scraping sound of his blade against the treated skin created a peaceful rhythm that complemented rather than disturbed the quiet. Oswald had always enjoyed this sound, finding in it evidence of preparation and care, the necessary work that preceded the more visible labor of actually writing. By the time the bells rang for none, the afternoon prayers, Oswald had made substantial progress through his current page. He marked his place carefully, cleaned his pen, and joined his brothers in their walk to the chapel. The service passed in its familiar sequence of psalms and prayers, the words so well known that Oswald's mind could rest in their rhythm without needing to think about what came next. Returning to the Scriptorium afterward, he found that Brother Edmund had left a small basket on his desk. Inside lay 3 perfect apples from the monastery's orchard, their skin showing the pale green of early ripeness. Oswald, 41 years old, smiled at this thoughtfulness. Edmund understood without being told that Oswald sometimes grew hungry between meals during days of intense concentration, and the younger monk had quietly provided a solution. Oswald took 1 apple and bit into it, the crisp flesh releasing a spray of tart juice. He chewed slowly, savoring the fruit's clean flavor while his eyes rested on the page he had been copying. Sometimes stepping back from work for even a few moments allowed him to see it with a fresh perspective. And indeed, he now noticed a letter that could be improved slightly. Not an error exactly, but a formation that lacked the grace of his usual execution. He made a mental note to be more careful with that particular letter going forward. The apple consumed, he returned to his writing with renewed energy. His hand moved across the page with its characteristic steadiness, each letter emerging in proper sequence. The gospel text he copied told of healing and compassion, themes that resonated quietly in his awareness as the words passed through his consciousness. He did not pause to contemplate their meaning deeply, but neither did he ignore their content entirely. They simply rested in him as he worked, like stones in a streambed. Brother Martin began singing softly to himself, a hymn they had learned together years ago. His voice was gentle and slightly rough, but true in pitch, and the melody filled the scriptorium with warmth. Oswald found his own pen strokes falling into rhythm with the song, though he made no conscious effort to synchronize them. Work and music blended naturally, each enhancing the other. The afternoon stretched toward evening through gradual degrees of changing light and temperature. Oswald completed another full page and began a third, his progress steady and satisfying. His ink-stained fingers showed the accumulation of the day's labor, the black stains reaching slightly higher on his right index finger and thumb than they had that morning. His graying auburn hair needed smoothing again, but he paid it little attention, focused entirely on the letters forming beneath his pen. A visiting monk from another monastery appeared at the scriptorium door, escorted by Brother Cuthbert. The visitor wished to see their library, and Cuthbert led him to the adjoining chamber where the completed manuscripts were kept. Their voices drifted back occasionally, soft discussions of various texts and their contents. Oswald listened with half his attention, pleased to hear genuine interest in the fruits of their collective labor. The bells for Vespers came sooner than expected, as they often did when work progressed well. Oswald set aside his pen with reluctance and satisfaction mixed together. The reluctance came from having to pause in the middle of a flowing section of text, but the satisfaction arose from seeing how much he had accomplished through the day's steady effort. Tomorrow he would pick up exactly where he stopped, and the work would continue in its endless, peaceful progression. In the chapel, the evening light entered through the western windows, painting the stone walls with amber and rose. The Vespers service took on a particularly beautiful quality in this illumination, and Oswald felt his voice lifting more strongly in the chants, responding to the loveliness of the moment. Brother Edmund stood 2 places to his left, and their voices occasionally found the same note, creating a brief harmony before diverging again into their separate parts. The evening meal consisted of bean pottage thick with vegetables, and bread with a small portion of butter, a rare treat that suggested some celebration Oswald had forgotten. He ate with appreciation, the rich food satisfying his body's needs after another day of concentrated mental and physical work. Around him, his brothers showed similar contentment, their faces peaceful in the candlelight. After the meal, Oswald chose to spend his free time in the warming room, where a fire burned in the large hearth. Several other brothers had gathered there as well, some sitting in silence, others engaged in quiet conversation. Brother Edmund sat near the fire, mending a tear in his work tunic with careful stitches. Oswald settled onto a bench nearby, simply resting in the warmth and the gentle companionship. Brother Anselm, the master illuminator who had taught Oswald his ink recipe, sat across the room with his eyes closed. At 68 years old, Anselm no longer worked in the scriptorium daily, but his presence in the community remained strong. Oswald observed him with affection and respect, seeing in the elderly monk's lined face the accumulation of decades spent in service to their shared craft. Anselm's breathing was slow and even, his hands folded peacefully in his lap, and Oswald wondered if he was asleep or simply resting in that state between wakefulness and sleep that often came to those who had learned to be truly still. The fire crackled softly, sending occasional sparks up the chimney. The warmth soaked into Oswald's muscles, easing tensions he had not fully noticed accumulating during the day. His ink-stained fingers rested on his knees, and he studied them briefly, these hands that had written thousands upon thousands of words over the years. They were not beautiful hands, but they were capable and steady, and they served their purpose well. Brother Martin entered the warming room and took a seat near Oswald. The illuminator carried a small piece of wood and a carving knife, and he began working on what appeared to be a decorative medallion. The quiet scraping of blade against wood added another layer to the room's peaceful atmosphere. Martin worked with the same focused attention he brought to his manuscript illuminations, each cut deliberate and precise. The bells for Compline arrived at their appointed time, and the gathered monks rose to make their way to the chapel for the day's final prayers. Oswald stood slowly, his body heavy with the pleasant fatigue of a day well spent. The walk through the darkening corridors felt meditative, each step a small prayer in itself, a movement toward rest and completion. In the chapel, darkness had nearly claimed full dominion. Candles burned at the altar and in sconces along the walls, but their light seemed fragile against the weight of night pressing in through the windows. The monks' voices rose in the Compline chants, and Oswald sang with particular awareness of the words, their themes of protection and peaceful sleep resonating deeply as his own rest approached. The great silence descended once more, and Oswald made his way to his cell. He performed his evening routine with the same care as always, each action deliberate and mindful. When he knelt for his private prayers, he found himself giving thanks for the day's work, for his brother's companionship, for the stability and peace of his life. These prayers were not elaborate or eloquent, simply honest expressions of gratitude rising from a contented heart. Sleep claimed him quickly after he lay down, his body surrendering to rest with the ease of one who had expended his energy well and purposefully. The darkness in his cell felt protective rather than oppressive, a gentle shroud that invited deep and restorative sleep. His breathing deepened, his awareness faded, and he drifted into the realm of dreams where time lost its ordinary structure. The night passed in its measured way, and matins came again with its summons to prayer. Oswald woke and rose, his movements automatic in the darkness. The cycle continued, eternal and comforting in its repetition. After the brief service, he returned to his cell and slept again until lauds, his rest profound and healing. Dawn arrived with clearing skies, the previous day's clouds having moved on during the night. The sunrise service took place in strengthening light, and Oswald felt particular energy in his body as he sang the morning psalms. Some days arrived with special clarity, and this appeared to be one of them, a gift he accepted with quiet gratitude. After breaking his fast, Oswald returned to the Scriptorium with a sense of eager anticipation for the day's work. He settled at his desk, 41 years old, and hummed his plain chant melody while arranging his materials. His ink-stained fingers moved through the familiar motions of preparation, and his graying auburn hair caught the early light as he bent over the page where he had stopped the previous evening. The gospel text resumed its flow from his pen. He had reached a particularly beautiful passage, one filled with images of growth and abundance, and the words seemed to write themselves with unusual ease. His pen glided across the vellum, the ink flowing perfectly, each letter forming with grace and precision. This was work at its finest, when effort and ease merged into something approaching meditation. Brother Martin arrived and took up his illumination work, but this morning he was joined by Brother Anselm. The master illuminator had decided to work on a special project, a decorated initial letter for a psalter. Oswald glanced over occasionally to watch the old man's skilled hands mixing pigments and applying gold leaf, the movement still sure despite his advanced age. The sight brought him quiet joy, evidence that craft and purpose could sustain a person through all the years of a long life. The morning progressed with exceptional smoothness. Oswald's concentration remained unbroken, his hands steady, his mind clear. He completed page after page, the gospel text flowing onto the vellum in neat columns of precise lettering. By the time the bells rang for a long time, he had accomplished more than usual for a morning's work, and the satisfaction this brought settled warm in his chest. At the midday meal, Brother Edmund presented him with a small jar of honey, a gift from the monastery's beehives. Oswald accepted it with genuine pleasure, knowing he could use it to sweeten his evening cup of warm milk, a small luxury he allowed himself occasionally. The younger monk's thoughtfulness continued to manifest in these quiet ways, gestures that required no acknowledgement but enriched the daily texture of their shared life. The afternoon brought a visitor to the Scriptorium, a nobleman from a nearby estate who had commissioned a book of hours from the monastery. Brother Anselm showed him the progress on the illuminations, and the man's face showed genuine appreciation for the beauty being created. Oswald continued his copying work during this visit, but he felt pleased knowing that their craft brought such joy to those who encountered it. The nobleman departed with expressions of gratitude and the promise of additional commissions in the future. After the nobleman departed, a particular quietness settled over the Scriptorium, the kind that follows a brief disturbance and feels deeper by contrast. Oswald appreciated this return to stillness, his pen resuming its familiar rhythm across the page. The afternoon light streamed through the window with renewed clarity, as if the clouds had parted specifically to illuminate his work. Brother Martin began humming again, a different melody this time, one from the feast of St. John. The tune wandered through the chamber, weaving around the sounds of pens scratching and pages turning. Oswald found himself humming his own plainchant melody in quiet harmony, the two melodies coexisting without competing, each occupying its own space in the shared air. His current section of text required him to form several elaborate capital letters, opportunities for modest decoration within the otherwise plain columns of script. Oswald approached these with the same care he brought to ordinary letters, but allowed himself slightly more time to ensure their flourishes achieved proper balance. His ink-stained fingers guided the pen through the curves and extensions, creating letters that were functional yet possessed their own understated beauty. Brother Cuthbert rose from his desk and approached Oswald's workspace, carrying a question about proper spacing for a charter he was preparing. Oswald set down his pen and considered the issue carefully, drawing on his years of experience to provide guidance. The younger scribe listened with attention, nodded his understanding, and returned to his own desk with visible relief at having his uncertainty resolved. These small exchanges of knowledge represented another aspect of their community's functioning, each member supporting the others through shared expertise. The afternoon stretched onward in its leisurely way. Oswald completed another decorated capital and continued with the regular text that followed. The gospel passage spoke of seeds and soil, of growth happening in hidden places, and he found the imagery particularly soothing. His pen moved steadily, transcribing words that had been copied countless times before by countless other scribes, adding his own link to this long chain of transmission. Brother Timothy appeared again, this time bringing fresh rushes to replace those on the scriptorium floor. The old rushes had grown stale and crushed from weeks of use, and the new ones released a clean, grassy scent as Timothy spread them evenly across the stones. Oswald paused in his work to breathe in this freshness, grateful for the herbalist's attention to such details. The monastery functioned because each member tended to his particular responsibilities with care and thoroughness. When the bells rang for none, the afternoon prayers, Oswald marked his place and cleaned his pen with his usual diligence. The walk to the chapel took him through the cloister, where he paused briefly to observe the garden. New growth showed everywhere, spring asserting itself with quiet insistence. The herbs were flourishing under Brother Timothy's care, and the apple trees bore tiny fruits that would swell and ripen as summer progressed. In the chapel, Oswald took his customary place, 41 years old with graying auburn hair that caught the filtered light. His voice joined with his brothers in the familiar psalms, the words rolling through the space with the weight of centuries. He had sung these same psalms thousands of times, yet they retained their capacity to center and calm him, to remind him of purposes larger than any individual life. Returning to his work, he found a surprise waiting on his desk. Someone had placed a smooth river stone there, gray and perfectly oval, its surface polished by years of water flowing over it. Oswald picked it up and felt its coolness against his palm, its weight substantial but not heavy. He recognized it as coming from the collection Brother Edmund kept in the herbarium, stones the younger monk had gathered from the riverbank during various expeditions for water plants. The gift touched Oswald deeply, this small offering of beauty requiring nothing but appreciation. He set the stone at the corner of his desk where he could see it while working, a reminder of thoughtfulness and connection. Then he returned his attention to the page, dipping his pen and resuming the text where he had paused. His ink-stained fingers moved with their characteristic precision, and the letters continued to emerge in their proper sequence, each one a small act of attention and care. The afternoon progressed toward evening through imperceptible stages. Brother Anselm completed his work on the decorated initial and held it up to examine in the light. The gold leaf caught the sun and seemed to glow from within, the blue and red pigments surrounding it rich and deep. The old master nodded with satisfaction, a small smile creasing his weathered face. Brother Martin leaned over to admire the work, and the two illuminators shared a moment of quiet appreciation for their craft. Oswald completed yet another page and began a fresh sheet of vellum. This one he had prepared himself just that morning, and its surface felt particularly smooth beneath his pen. The ink responded beautifully, neither spreading too far nor sitting too thickly on the surface. These small perfections made the work easier and more pleasant, though Oswald would have continued regardless of such conditions. The work itself was the point, not the ease or difficulty of its execution. The gospel text he was copying entered a new section, one dealing with forgiveness and mercy. Oswald let the themes rest in his mind as he wrote, not analyzing them, but simply allowing them to be present. His life in the monastery provided few occasions for the kind of dramatic forgiveness the text described, but he understood these principles applied equally to small daily irritations and disappointments. The practice of letting go, of releasing resentment before it could take root, this was a form of constant mercy he tried to maintain. Brother Cuthbert gathered his materials and departed early, called away to some administrative duty. His absence changed the balance of the Scriptorium subtly, but not unpleasantly. Sometimes 3 workers felt exactly right, other times 2 or even 1. The chamber accommodated all these variations with equal grace, its purpose unchanged regardless of how many people occupied it. As Vespers approached, Oswald found himself reaching the end of a particularly satisfying day's work. He had completed more pages than usual, and all of them met his standards for quality and precision. The sense of accomplishment he felt was not prideful but simply content, a recognition that his time and energy had been well invested. He cleaned his pen thoroughly, covered his ink, and arranged his workspace for the next day's resumption. The evening service filled the chapel with the day's last natural light, a golden glow that seemed to bless the gathered community. Oswald sang with particular fullness of voice, responding to the beauty of the moment and the satisfaction of the day's labor. Brother Edmund's voice rose nearby, and again they found occasional harmonies, brief alignments of pitch that dissolved and reformed like patterns in flowing water. At the evening meal, the brothers were served fresh fish again, this time prepared with wild garlic that Brother Timothy had gathered from the woods. The pungent herb cut through the mild flavor of the fish, creating a combination that pleased Oswald's palate. He ate slowly, as always, but with special awareness of the food's taste and texture. Sometimes meals were simply fuel. Other times they became small celebrations of Earth's abundance and human skill in preparing it. After the meal, Oswald returned to the warming room, where the fire had been built up against the evening's chill. Several brothers were already there, including Brother Anselm, who sat in his favored chair near the hearth. The old illuminator's eyes were open this evening, and he gestured for Oswald to sit beside him. When Oswald had settled, Anselm spoke quietly about a manuscript he had worked on 40 years earlier, his voice soft but animated as he recalled particular challenges and solutions. Oswald listened with genuine interest, honored that the master would share these memories. Anselm described the mixing of a particular shade of blue, a complex process requiring lapis lazuli ground to specific fineness, and mixed with egg yolk and water in precise proportions. The old man's hands moved as he spoke, miming the grinding and mixing motions, and Oswald could see in those gestures the accumulated skill of a lifetime devoted to craft. Brother Martin joined them and added his own questions about pigment preparation, and soon a quiet conversation had developed among the 3 of them, centered on the technical aspects of their work. Other brothers listened without participating, content to absorb knowledge that might prove useful someday. The fire crackled and popped, sending warmth out into the room, and the gathering took on a quality of gentle fellowship that required no forced enthusiasm, simply the pleasure of shared interest and mutual respect. The bells for Compline arrived, and the group made its way to the chapel for the night's final prayers. Oswald walked beside Brother Anselm, matching his pace to the older man's slower stride. They entered the chapel together and took their places, and when the prayers began, Oswald noticed how Anselm's voice, though weaker than in years past, still carried complete certainty in the familiar words. After Compline, the great silence descended once more. Oswald made his way to his cell, 41 years old with ink-stained fingers and graying auburn hair, his body tired in the way that speaks of effort well spent. He performed his evening ablutions, knelt for his private prayers, and lay down on his narrow bed. The wool blanket he pulled over himself held the day's accumulated warmth, and he settled into it with a sigh of deep contentment. Sleep came swiftly, carrying him into darkness that held no threat or uncertainty, only rest. His dreams, when they came, were gentle things, images of manuscripts and sunlight, of hands forming letters with patient precision. The night cradled him, and his body took the opportunity to restore itself for another day's work. Matins arrived in what seemed like moments, though hours had actually passed. Oswald rose in the darkness and made his way to the chapel, where his brothers were gathering like shadows resolving into familiar shapes. The service passed in its timeless way, and afterward he returned to his cell for additional rest until lauds. This second sleep was lighter, more like deep relaxation, but it served its purpose of preparing him fully for the coming day. Dawn broke clear and cool, the spring weather continuing its gentle progression towards summer. At lauds, Oswald sang the morning psalms with a voice refreshed by sleep and ready for whatever the day might bring. After breaking his fast with porridge and bread, he made his way to the Scriptorium, eager to resume his copying work. The chamber welcomed him with its familiar scents and atmosphere. He settled at his desk and hummed his plain chant melody while preparing his workspace. The river stone Brother Edmund had given him caught his eye, and he picked it up briefly, feeling its smooth coolness before setting it back in its place. Then his ink-stained fingers took up his pen, and he found his place in the gospel text, and the work continued as it had for days and weeks and years, each moment of attention adding to the great accumulation of preserved knowledge. Brother Martin arrived and began his own work, and soon Brother Cuthbert joined them, the Scriptorium filling with its full complement of craftsmen. The morning light strengthened, the pens moved across the vellum, and another day unfolded in the endless peaceful rhythm of monastic life. Oswald bent over his page, his concentration complete, his purpose clear, his contentment deep and abiding. The hours passed as they always did, marked by bells and prayers, by the movement of sunlight across stone floors, by the gradual accumulation of words on pages. Oswald's hand maintained its steady rhythm, neither speeding nor slowing, simply continuing with the constancy that had defined his work for 27 years. His graying auburn hair needed occasional smoothing. His ink-stained fingers required periodic flexing to prevent cramping, but these small attentions barely interrupted the flow of his labor. By midday, he had completed several more pages, bringing him closer to the end of the gospel text he had been copying for months. The finish line approached but did not hurry him. When this manuscript was complete, another would be waiting, and after that another still. The work was infinite, and he was grateful for its inexhaustibility. A life needed purpose to give it shape and meaning, and his purpose lay in these careful letters, this patient transmission of sacred words from old pages to new. At the midday meal, Brother Edmund sat beside him as usual, and they ate in companionable silence. The younger monk's presence had become such a constant feature of Oswald's days that he could hardly imagine the refectory without him. When the meal ended, and they departed for their separate tasks, Oswald felt the gentle tug of affection that comes from sustained and undemanding friendship, a quiet warmth that asked nothing but gave much. The afternoon unfolded with the same peaceful productivity as the morning. Oswald's pen moved across page after page, his attention never wavering, his hand never faltering. The gospel text approached its conclusion, and he found himself both eager to complete it and reluctant to reach the end. But such feelings were merely passing thoughts, acknowledged and released. The work would be finished when it was finished, neither sooner nor later, and his feelings about its timing were ultimately irrelevant. As the afternoon light began its slow descent toward evening, Oswald reached a passage in the Gospel that spoke of vineyards and harvest, of laborers receiving their wages at day's end. The text carried its own quiet poetry, and he found himself savoring the words even as he copied them with his usual precision. His ink-stained fingers guided the pen through each letter, and the familiar weight of the quill in his hand felt like an extension of his own body, inseparable from thought and intention. Brother Anselm entered the Scriptorium carrying a small wooden box. He approached Oswald's desk and set it down gently, then opened the lid to reveal an array of pigments he had prepared, deep reds and brilliant blues, rich golds and subtle greens. The old master explained in his soft voice that these were for Oswald's use should he wish to add any decorated elements to his gospel manuscript. The gift was generous and unexpected, and Oswald felt genuine gratitude rising in his chest. He thanked Brother Anselm with simple sincerity, and the two men stood together for a moment, looking down at the vibrant pigments. Anselm's weathered hand rested briefly on Oswald's shoulder, a gesture of affection and solidarity between craftsmen. Then the old illuminator departed, leaving behind both the pigments and a deepened sense of connection. Oswald returned to his copying with renewed warmth in his heart, the knowledge that he was valued and understood adding sweetness to the already satisfying work. The afternoon continued its gentle progression. Brother Martin completed the illumination he had been working on and began preparing materials for his next project. The sounds of his activity, the soft clink of brushes against ceramic jars, the rustle of parchment being positioned, created a soothing backdrop to Oswald's concentration. Brother Cuthbert worked steadily at his charter, occasionally muttering quietly to himself as he calculated figures or verified spellings. A bird landed on the windowsill of the Scriptorium, a small brown sparrow that cocked its head and observed the interior with bright, curious eyes. It hopped along the stone ledge, peered in at the working monks, then flew away again into the afternoon. Oswald watched it depart with a slight smile. The bird's brief visit felt like a blessing, a reminder that the world beyond these walls continued in its own rhythms, indifferent to human concerns, yet somehow connected to them through the simple fact of shared existence. The bells for none rang across the monastery grounds, and the three scribes set aside their work to attend the afternoon prayers. The walk to the chapel took them through corridors now familiar beyond conscious awareness, each turn and doorway so deeply known that Oswald could have navigated them in complete darkness. This familiarity brought comfort rather than tedium, a sense of being rooted in place and purpose that steadied him against life's inevitable uncertainties. In the chapel, the afternoon light created patterns on the floor where it passed through the narrow windows. Oswald, 41 years old, stood in his accustomed place and added his voice to the communal prayer. The psalms they sang spoke of refuge and strength, of steadfast love enduring forever, and the words resonated with his own experience of monastic life. Here, within these stone walls, following this ancient rhythm of work and prayer, he had indeed found refuge and purpose. After the service, he returned to the Scriptorium to find that Brother Timothy had visited again, this time leaving a small bundle of dried rosemary on each scribe's desk. The herb's sharp, clean scent filled the chamber, and Oswald breathed it deeply, feeling the slight clearing it brought to his mind. He tucked the rosemary into a corner of his workspace where he could continue to benefit from its fragrance throughout the remaining hours of the workday. His gospel manuscript had progressed substantially. Looking back at the completed pages, Oswald could see the evidence of months of steady effort, each page a testament to patience and care. The sight brought him quiet satisfaction, not pride in achievement but simple contentment at seeing the fruits of sustained attention. This was what a life of work looked like, accumulated moment by moment, choice by choice, pen stroke by pen stroke. He resumed his copying, his hand moving with the same steadiness it had maintained throughout the day. The text flowed onto the vellum in neat columns, each line precisely aligned with those above and below it. His years of practice had made these alignments nearly automatic, his eye capable of judging distances and angles without conscious measurement. Yet he never took this skill for granted, always checking his work, always remaining attentive to the possibility of error. Brother Martin began singing again, a different hymn this time, one associated with the Feast of the Annunciation. His voice carried the melody with gentle certainty, and Oswald found himself humming his plain chant in counterpoint, the two tunes weaving together in the chamber's acoustic. Brother Cuthbert glanced up and smiled at this spontaneous harmony, then returned to his charter work with visible contentment. The afternoon drew toward its close through stages of shifting light. The sun descended toward the western horizon, and its rays entered the Scriptorium at a lower angle, creating longer shadows and warming the chamber with golden radiance. Oswald completed another page and paused to flex his ink-stained fingers, working out the stiffness that had accumulated during hours of gripping the pen. His graying auburn hair had fallen forward again, and he smoothed it back with one hand before taking up his work once more. A thought occurred to him about the pigments Brother Anselm had provided. Perhaps when he reached the final page of the Gospel, he might add a small decorated border, nothing elaborate but something that would acknowledge the completion of the work with appropriate beauty. The idea pleased him, and he let it rest in his mind as a gentle anticipation, something to look forward to without becoming attached to it. The bells for Vespers arrived, and Oswald marked his place with care before cleaning his pen. The evening service called, and he responded gladly, his body ready for the standing and singing after hours of sitting at his desk. He made his way to the chapel along with his fellow scribes, their footsteps creating a soft percussion on the stone floors. The Vespers service took place in the day's last natural light, the western windows admitting rays that seemed thick and golden, almost tangible. The monks' voices rose in evening psalms, and Oswald felt his own voice blending with the others, becoming part of something larger than himself. This dissolution of individual identity into communal purpose never failed to move him, this reminder that he was one part of a greater whole. At the evening meal, the brothers were served a hearty vegetable stew made with early spring greens from the garden. The broth was rich and warming, and chunks of bread served to soak up every last bit. Oswald ate with appreciation, his body welcoming the nourishment after a day of focused mental labor. Brother Edmund sat beside him, as always, and the younger monk's quiet presence continued to provide its gentle companionship. After the meal, Oswald chose to walk in the cloister rather than sitting in the warming room. The evening air held a particular freshness, and he wanted to breathe it deeply, to feel its coolness on his face after the day spent indoors. He paced slowly around the covered walkway, his hands clasped behind his back, his thoughts drifting without particular direction or purpose. The garden in the center of the cloister showed the steady progress of spring. The herbs had grown visibly even in the past few days, and small flowers had begun to open among the green growth. Oswald paused to observe them, these simple blooms that asked nothing and offered beauty freely. Brother Timothy could be seen in the distance, moving among the plants with his characteristic attentiveness, checking their health and removing any weeds that threatened to compete with them. The sky above had begun to show the first stars of evening, pale points of light appearing in the deepening blue. Oswald watched them emerge, these ancient markers of time and season that had guided his predecessors and would guide those who came after him. The continuity they represented matched his own sense of participating in something that transcended individual lives, a great chain of human endeavor stretching backward into the past and forward into an unknowable future. Brother Martin joined him in the cloister, and the two men walked together for a time in comfortable silence. Eventually, Martin spoke quietly about the illumination he had completed that day, describing the satisfaction he felt when a particularly challenging detail had resolved exactly as he had envisioned it. Oswald listened with understanding, knowing precisely the feeling his friend described. These moments of alignment between intention and execution were rare gifts, to be acknowledged and appreciated when they occurred. The bells for Compline rang across the monastery, and the two scribes made their way to the chapel for the day's final prayers. The darkness had deepened considerably, and the chapel's interior flickered with candlelight, creating dancing shadows on the ancient stones. Oswald took his place in the choir, 41 years old with ink-stained fingers and graying auburn hair, his voice joining the others in the night prayers that had been sung in this place for centuries. When the service concluded and the great silence descended, Oswald returned to his cell with the profound tiredness that speaks of a day fully lived. He prepared for sleep with his usual care, each action deliberate and complete. His private prayers that night included particular gratitude for Brother Anselm's gift of pigments, for Brother Edmund's continuing thoughtfulness, for the companionship of his fellow scribes, for the steady rhythm of work that gave his life structure and meaning. Sleep claimed him swiftly, his body surrendering to rest with the ease born of clean conscience and honest labor. The darkness of his cell held him safely, and his breathing deepened into the slow rhythm of profound rest. Whatever dreams came to him passed without leaving memory, simply part of the mind's mysterious work during the hours of sleep. The night moved through its appointed course, and matins arrived with its summons to prayer. Oswald woke and rose, his movements automatic in the darkness, his body knowing what to do without conscious direction. After the brief service, he returned to his cell and slept again until lauds, his rest continuing its restorative work. Dawn came with thin clouds stretched across the eastern sky, filtering the sunrise into soft bands of pink and orange. The laud service took place in this gentle illumination, and Oswald felt particularly peaceful as he sang the morning psalms. Some days arrived with special grace, and this appeared to be one of them, a gift he received with quiet thankfulness. After breaking his fast, Oswald made his way to the Scriptorium with a sense of calm anticipation. He settled at his desk and hummed his plain chant melody while preparing his materials. The river stone from Brother Edmund caught the morning light, its gray surface showing subtle variations of color he had not noticed before. He held it briefly, feeling its coolness and weight, then set it back in its place and turned to his work. The Gospel manuscript awaited him, closer now to completion than to beginning. Oswald opened to the page where he had stopped and studied the text he would copy today. His ink-stained fingers took up his pen, dipped it in the freshly stirred ink, and began to write. The letters emerged with their characteristic precision, each one carefully formed, each one adding to the slow accumulation of the complete text. Brother Martin arrived and took his place at his desk. Today the illuminator was beginning work on a new manuscript, a book of hours commissioned by a wealthy merchant's widow. The project would occupy him for many months, perhaps even a year or more, depending on the complexity of the decorations requested. Martin arranged his materials with visible pleasure, clearly looking forward to this extended engagement with a single beautiful object. Brother Cuthbert entered carrying news that he would be working in the monastery's administrative offices for the next several days, attending to financial records that required immediate attention. He would return to the Scriptorium when that task was complete. His departure left just 2 scribes in the chamber, and Oswald noticed how the space felt different with this reduced occupancy. Not better or worse, simply different. The acoustics altered subtly, the sense of shared presence lighter. The morning progressed through its familiar stages. Light strengthened and moved, warming different sections of the floor and walls. Oswald's pen traveled across the vellum, leaving its trail of precise letters. His concentration remained complete, his hand steady, his mind clear and focused. The work consumed him in the way that meaningful work does, filling consciousness entirely without creating strain or stress. By the time the bells rang for terce, He had completed several more pages, bringing him very near to the conclusion of the gospel text. Perhaps tomorrow or the day after, he would copy the final words and bring this long project to its completion. The thought pleased him, though he also knew that completion would bring a moment of emptiness, that brief pause before beginning the next manuscript when purpose might waver slightly before reasserting itself. After the morning prayer service, Oswald returned to the Scriptorium with the others, his body refreshed by the brief standing and movement. The chamber felt particularly welcoming with just himself and Brother Martin present, an intimacy of shared space that allowed for deeper concentration. He settled at his desk, his ink-stained fingers arranging the familiar tools with practiced efficiency. The gospel text awaited him, so close now to completion that he could sense its ending approaching like a distant landmark gradually drawing nearer. Oswald opened the original manuscript to his marked place and studied the passage he would copy today. The words spoke of light and darkness, of things hidden and things revealed, and their rhythm pleased him as he prepared to transcribe them onto fresh vellum. Brother Martin had begun mixing pigments for his new book of hours, and the scent of egg tempera filled the scriptorium with its distinctive smell, faintly sulphurous but not unpleasant. The illuminator hummed while he worked, selecting colors and testing them on a scrap of parchment to ensure they achieved the exact hues he desired. Oswald found the sound comforting, this evidence of another craftsman engaged in parallel labor. His pen moved across the page with the steadiness that had characterized his work for 27 years. Each letter emerged in its proper form. Each word followed its predecessor in the correct sequence. The act of copying had become so deeply ingrained in his body that his hands seemed to know what to do independent of conscious thought, though his attention never wavered. This paradox of automatic skill and complete awareness represented the fruit of decades spent at this single task. The morning light shifted gradually across his workspace, warming the vellum beneath his hands and creating subtle changes in how the ink appeared as it dried. Oswald noticed these variations without being distracted by them, simply incorporating them into his awareness as part of the complete experience of the work. The river stone Brother Edmund had given him sat at the edge of his desk, catching the light and seeming to glow with its own inner luminosity. By mid-morning, he had completed several more pages and paused to examine his progress. The manuscript had grown thick with completed work, dozens of pages now bound together at the spine, representing months of patient attention. Only a few more pages remained to be copied before the gospel text would be complete. Oswald felt the approaching conclusion not as pressure, but as gentle anticipation, a natural ending that would arrive in its own time. Brother Martin rose to retrieve something from the supply cabinet, and Oswald took the opportunity to stand as well, stretching his back and rolling his shoulders. His body appreciated these brief interruptions, moments of movement that prevented stiffness from accumulating. He walked to the window and looked out at the monastery grounds, where Brother Timothy could be seen working in the herb garden, his movements slow and deliberate as he tended to each plant individually. The view from the scriptorium window never failed to please Oswald. He could see a portion of the cloister, part of the chapter house, and beyond them the enclosing wall with its thick stones weathered by centuries of wind and rain. This place had stood long before his birth, and would continue long after his death, a thought that brought him comfort rather than melancholy. He was privileged to occupy this moment in the monastery's long existence, to add his small contribution to its ongoing life. Returning to his desk, Oswald settled back into his work position, 41 years old with graying auburn hair and ink-stained fingers that knew every aspect of this labor. He hummed his plain chant melody softly as he picked up his pen and found his place in the text. The familiar weight of the quill in his hand, the slight resistance of the vellum's surface, the gradual depletion of ink requiring periodic replenishment, all these sensations grounded him in the present moment and in his purpose. The text he was copying entered a particularly beautiful passage, one that spoke of seeds growing secretly in darkness, of harvest coming in its appointed time. The agricultural metaphors resonated with Oswald's own experience, though his harvest was measured in completed manuscripts rather than wheat or barley. Still, the principle remained the same: patient attention over time, trust in process, faith that the work would yield its proper fruit. Brother Martin had returned to his illumination work, and now the two monks worked in companionable silence, each absorbed in his own task but aware of the other's presence. This was one of the great gifts of monastic life, Oswald reflected, the ability to be alone without being lonely, to work in silence without feeling isolated. The community held each member, providing support and connection even when no words were spoken. The bells for sext rang at midday, and the two scribes set aside their work to attend the noon prayers. The walk to the chapel took them through sun-warmed corridors, and Oswald felt the heat penetrating the stone walls, evidence that spring was giving way gradually to summer. The seasons turned in their endless cycle, each one bringing its particular gifts and challenges, all of them ultimately supporting the monastery's timeless rhythm. In the chapel, the midday light entered through the southern windows, creating bright rectangles on the floor. Oswald stood in his customary place and sang the noon psalms with his brothers. His voice had grown slightly hoarse from the morning's humming, but it served its purpose well enough, adding its contribution to the collective prayer. When the service concluded, he felt refreshed despite not having rested, the brief change of activity and posture sufficient to renew his energy. The midday meal consisted of cheese and bread with early radishes from the garden, their sharp bite a welcome contrast to the mild cheese. Oswald ate slowly, chewing thoroughly, letting the food nourish his body properly. Brother Edmund sat beside him and gestured toward the radishes with a slight smile, clearly pleased at how well they had grown under his care. Oswald nodded his appreciation, understanding without words the younger monk's satisfaction in seeing his efforts bear literal fruit. After the meal, Oswald returned to the Scriptorium feeling ready to complete as much work as possible during the afternoon hours. These were often his most productive times, when his hand had fully warmed to the task, and his mind had settled into complete focus. He took his seat at the desk and prepared his materials with the same care he had shown that morning, never rushing the preparatory work, never treating it as less important than the actual copying. His pen moved across the page with renewed energy, the letters flowing onto the vellum in steady succession. The gospel text approached its final passages now, the narrative moving toward its conclusion with the same gentle inevitability that characterized all natural processes. Oswald found himself both eager to reach the end and reluctant to see the project complete. This ambivalence was familiar to him, appearing at the conclusion of every major manuscript, a bittersweet mixture of accomplishment and loss. Brother Martin had made significant progress on his initial sketches for the Book of Hours, and he paused occasionally to show Oswald particularly pleasing designs. The illuminator's skill amazed Oswald, the way Martin could envision complete compositions and then execute them with such precision. Though Oswald's own work rarely involved elaborate decoration, he appreciated the artistry that went into Martin's illuminations, recognizing in them a kindred dedication to craft and beauty. The afternoon light began its slow descent, and the scriptorium gradually cooled as the sun moved westward. Oswald completed another page and began what he now realized would be his final sheet of vellum for this gospel manuscript. The end had arrived more quickly than expected, though of course it came exactly when it should have, neither sooner nor later. He approached these final sections with particular care, wanting the last pages to match the quality of all those that preceded them. His ink-stained fingers guided the pen through the concluding passages of the gospel, words of commissioning and promise, of presence and power extending to the end of the age. Oswald let their meaning rest in his awareness as he wrote, these ancient assurances that had comforted countless readers over centuries. His own faith was quiet and undemonstrative, but it ran deep, woven into every aspect of his daily life, inseparable from his work and his community. The final words approached, and Oswald slowed slightly, not from reluctance but from desire to give them their full weight. Each letter received his complete attention, each word its proper spacing. When he formed the last letter of the last word, he set down his pen and sat back, looking at the completed page with feelings too complex to name simply. Satisfaction, certainly, and gratitude, and perhaps a touch of wonder that this task began months ago had now reached its completion. Brother Martin noticed Oswald's stillness and glanced over, understanding immediately what had occurred. The illuminator smiled warmly and offered quiet congratulations, his words few but sincere. Oswald nodded his thanks, then turned his attention to the practical matter of what came next. The manuscript needed its final touches, and he remembered Brother Anselm's gift of pigments, still sitting unused in their wooden box. The wooden box of pigments sat at the corner of Oswald's desk where he had placed it days earlier. He opened the lid carefully and studied the contents with renewed interest, now that the time had come to actually use them. The colors glowed with quiet intensity even in their dry state: deep crimson, brilliant azure, warm gold, soft green. Brother Anselm had prepared each one with meticulous care, grinding the minerals to perfect fineness and binding them with materials that would ensure their longevity. Oswald considered how best to honor the completed manuscript with decoration. He did not possess Brother Anselm's elaborate skills in illumination, nor Brother Martin's gift for complex compositions, but he could create something modest and beautiful, something appropriate to both the text and his own abilities. He decided to add a simple decorated border to the final page, incorporating some of the pigments into a design that would mark the Gospel's conclusion with fitting grace. Brother Martin, understanding what Oswald intended, came over to offer guidance. The illuminator explained the process of preparing the pigments for use, mixing each with the proper medium and testing the consistency on a scrap of parchment. His instructions were clear and patient, and Oswald listened with complete attention, grateful for this generosity in sharing knowledge. When Martin returned to his own work, Oswald felt prepared to begin this new aspect of his craft. He started by sketching the border design lightly in pencil, a simple pattern of interlacing vines that would frame the final words of the gospel text. The pencil marks were barely visible, just enough to guide his application of color without overwhelming the page. His ink-stained fingers held the pencil with the same steady grip they brought to the pen, and the lines emerged clean and even. The first pigment he prepared was the green, mixing it carefully with egg tempera as Brother Martin had instructed. The color came alive as water and binding medium combined with the powder, transforming from dull dust into vibrant hue. Oswald tested it on his scrap parchment and found the consistency satisfactory, neither too thick nor too thin. He loaded a fine brush and began applying color to the vine pattern he had sketched. The work required different skills than copying text, a different kind of attention and control. The brush responded differently than the pen, its flexibility demanding adjustments in pressure and angle. Oswald worked slowly, allowing himself time to learn these new movements, accepting that his first attempts might lack the refinement of experienced illuminators. Yet even as a beginner in this aspect of the craft, he brought to it the same patience and care that characterized all his work. Brother Martin glanced over occasionally, offering quiet suggestions about technique. When Oswald's brushstrokes became hesitant, Martin reminded him to work with confidence, to trust the brush and the pigment to do what they were designed to do. This advice helped, and Oswald felt his movements gradually becoming more assured, the green vines taking shape with increasing grace. The afternoon progressed as he worked on this decoration, the time passing differently than it did during text copying. This new challenge engaged his mind in unfamiliar ways, requiring problem-solving and adaptation rather than the smooth execution of long-practiced skills. Yet beneath the surface differences, the work shared essential qualities with his usual labor: the need for concentration, the value of patience, the satisfaction of seeing beauty emerge gradually from careful attention. By the time the bells rang for none, Oswald had completed the green portions of his border design. The vines curved around the text in an elegant frame, their color rich and even. He cleaned his brush thoroughly before setting it aside, knowing that proper care of tools mattered as much in illumination as in any other craft. Brother Martin examined his work and offered genuine praise, noting that Oswald showed natural aptitude for this kind of decoration. The afternoon prayers provided a welcome break from the intense concentration required by the illumination work. Oswald stood in the chapel, 41 years old with graying auburn hair, and sang the psalms with particular fullness of voice, his body grateful for the movement and his mind refreshed by the temporary shift of focus. When he returned to the Scriptorium, he felt ready to continue with the next phase of decoration. The blue pigment required preparation, and Oswald approached this task with the care it demanded. The lapis lazuli powder was precious, imported from distant lands at considerable expense, and every grain must be used wisely. He mixed it according to Brother Martin's earlier instructions, creating a brilliant azure that seemed to hold the very essence of sky within its depths. This color he would use sparingly, for small flowers scattered among the green vines. His brush, cleaned and dried from its earlier use, took up the blue pigment with the lightest touch. Oswald applied tiny dots of color at intervals along the vines, each one representing a flower in simplified form. The blue stood out beautifully against the green, and the overall effect pleased him more than he had anticipated. Perhaps he possessed more talent for this work than he had realized, or perhaps any task approached with sufficient attention could yield satisfying results. The gold pigment remained, and this would be the final addition to his decorated border. Brother Martin explained that gold required special treatment, its application more complex than that of other colors. Yet Oswald listened carefully and followed the instructions precisely, and soon he was applying tiny touches of gold to accentuate certain elements of his design. The metal caught the afternoon light and seemed to glow with inner fire, transforming his modest border into something genuinely beautiful. As the decoration neared completion, Oswald felt a deep sense of satisfaction settling over him. This manuscript, begun months ago with its first careful letters, now concluded with these final touches of color and gold. The entire project represented not just his skill as a scribe, but his devotion to the sacred text he had been copying, his desire to preserve and honor words that had sustained communities of faith for over 1,000 years. Brother Martin came to stand beside him and observe the completed border. The illuminator's face showed genuine admiration, and he remarked that Oswald had created something truly lovely, work that honored both the text and the tradition of manuscript decoration. His words brought warmth to Oswald's chest, this recognition from a master craftsman whose opinion he valued deeply. They stood together in silence for a moment, simply appreciating the beauty that had emerged from patience and care. The afternoon drew toward evening, and Oswald cleaned his brushes with meticulous attention, ensuring that no pigment remained to harden and ruin them. He returned Brother Anselm's pigments to their wooden box, making a mental note to thank the old master again when next they met. The decorated manuscript page lay on his desk, its colors still slightly damp, needing time to dry fully before the manuscript could be handled or stored. The bells for vespers rang, and both scribes departed the Scriptorium, leaving behind the day's work to rest undisturbed. In the chapel, the evening service unfolded with its customary grace. Oswald sang the familiar psalms with a heart full of quiet gladness, grateful for the day's accomplishments and for the skills he had discovered within himself. Brother Edmund's voice rose nearby, and they found their occasional harmonies, those brief moments of perfect alignment that dissolved as quickly as they formed. At the evening meal, the brothers were served fresh bread and a soup made with spring vegetables, the flavors bright and clean. Oswald ate with appreciation, his body welcoming the nourishment after a day that had been both mentally and physically demanding in new ways. Brother Edmund sat beside him, and Oswald found himself wanting to share his news about completing the gospel manuscript and adding the decorated border. Yet words seemed inadequate, and instead he simply smiled at the younger monk, letting his contentment speak for itself. After the meal, Oswald sought out Brother Anselm in the warming room. The old illuminator sat in his customary chair, and his face brightened when Oswald approached. In simple words, Oswald described his day's work, the completion of the gospel text and his first attempts at illuminated decoration using the pigments Anselm had provided. The master listened with evident pleasure, asking gentle questions about technique and offering suggestions for future projects. Their conversation drew the attention of Brother Martin, who joined them and added his own observations about Oswald's natural aptitude for decorative work. The three craftsmen talked quietly about manuscripts and illumination, about the satisfaction of seeing beauty emerge from careful labor, about the privilege of preserving sacred texts for future generations. Other brothers gathered nearby to listen, and the warming room took on an atmosphere of gentle fellowship, knowledge being shared, and appreciation being expressed in the soft firelight. The bells for Compline arrived, and the gathered monks made their way to the chapel for the night's final prayers. Oswald walked with Brother Anselm, matching his pace to the elderly man's slower stride. In the chapel, darkness had claimed full dominion outside, and the interior flickered with candlelight that created shifting shadows on the ancient stones. The Compline prayers spoke of protection and rest, of divine presence through the night hours, and Oswald sang them with particular awareness of their meaning. After the service, the great silence descended, and Oswald made his way to his cell. He prepared for sleep with his usual care, but tonight his private prayers included specific gratitude for the day's completion of the gospel manuscript, for the unexpected discovery of new skills in illumination, for the guidance of brothers Anselm and Martin, for the continuing presence of Brother Edmund's friendship. These blessings accumulated like treasures, enriching his life in ways both obvious and subtle. Sleep came easily, carrying him into darkness that held only peace and rest. His dreams, when they came, included images of colored pigments and golden letters, of vines growing across pages, of light streaming through windows onto completed work. The night cradled him gently, and his body took the opportunity to restore itself fully. Matins arrived in what seemed like mere moments, though the full night had passed. Oswald rose in the darkness and made his way to the chapel, where the earliest prayers of the day unfolded in their timeless pattern. After the service, he returned to his cell and slept again until lauds, this second rest completing the night's restorative work. Dawn broke with spectacular color, the eastern sky painted in shades of rose and gold that seemed to promise blessing for the day ahead. At lauds, Oswald sang with particular joy, his voice strong and clear in the morning air. After breaking his fast, he made his way to the Scriptorium with eager anticipation, wondering what new manuscript might await his attention now that the gospel was complete. The Scriptorium welcomed him with familiar scents and atmosphere. He approached his desk to find that during the night, the pigments on his decorated border had dried completely. The colors had deepened slightly in the drying, and the gold gleamed with quiet brilliance. Oswald stood looking at this completed work, 41 years old with ink-stained fingers and graying auburn hair, and felt profound satisfaction settle in his chest. Brother Martin arrived and immediately came to examine the dried illumination. The colors had set beautifully, he pronounced, and the overall effect achieved exactly what such decoration should accomplish. honoring the text without overwhelming it, adding beauty without distraction. His professional assessment confirmed what Oswald had hoped, that his first attempt at this kind of work had succeeded in its modest aims. The completed gospel manuscript now needed to be properly bound and added to the monastery's library. Brother Martin offered to handle this task, as he had more experience with the bookbinding process. Oswald accepted gratefully, knowing his friend would ensure the manuscript received appropriate treatment. They carried it together to the binding workshop, where another brother specialized in creating leather covers and stitching pages into permanent form. Returning to the Scriptorium, Oswald found himself at a threshold moment, the completion of one major project creating a brief pause before beginning the next. The abbot would assign him a new text to copy, but that assignment had not yet come. For today, he could attend to smaller tasks, preparing fresh vellum sheets, mixing new batches of ink, organizing his workspace, perhaps practicing more decorative techniques with Brother Martin's guidance. He chose to begin by preparing vellum, a task that required patience and physical effort, but allowed his mind to rest from the intense concentration of copying. He selected several sheets of treated calfskin and began the process of scraping them smooth, removing any remaining imperfections and creating the perfect surface for receiving ink. The work was meditative in its repetition, the curved blade moving across the vellum in steady strokes, each pass bringing the surface closer to ideal smoothness. Brother Cuthbert returned to the Scriptorium, his administrative duties completed for the time being. He settled at his desk with visible relief, clearly happy to return to the work of copying rather than managing accounts. His presence restored the Scriptorium to its full complement of regular workers, and the chamber took on its familiar atmosphere of shared industry. The morning progressed peacefully as Oswald prepared sheet after sheet of vellum. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, and the pile of finished sheets grew steadily. This preparatory work possessed its own satisfaction, different from the pleasure of actual copying but valuable nonetheless. Every manuscript required these careful preparations, and attending to them properly honored the sacred texts that would eventually appear on these pages. By midday, Oswald had prepared enough vellum to last several weeks of copying work. The bells for sext rang, and he set aside his scraping blade to attend the noon prayers. In the chapel, he stood in his accustomed place and added his voice to the communal prayer, feeling himself part of something larger and more enduring than any individual life. The afternoon brought a visitor to the monastery, a messenger from the cathedral at Durham carrying correspondence for the abbot. While such arrivals were not uncommon, they always created a gentle ripple of interest through the community, a reminder that the monastery existed not in complete isolation, but as part of a larger network of religious houses and ecclesiastical administration. Oswald watched from the Scriptorium window as the messenger dismounted in the courtyard, his horse's flanks dark with sweat from the journey. Brother Martin had returned to his Book of Hours, and the chamber held the comfortable sounds of his work, brush against parchment, the soft clink of pigment jars, occasional satisfied sighs when a detail emerged exactly as envisioned. Oswald found these sounds soothing as he turned his attention to organizing his collection of pens, examining each quill for wear and trimming those that needed refreshing. His ink-stained fingers moved through the familiar motions of pen preparation, testing the flexibility of each nib and setting aside those that had grown too worn for precise work. These worn pens would not be discarded, but saved for rougher tasks, practice sheets for young novices learning to write, or preliminary sketches that required no fine detail. Nothing in the monastery went to waste if it could still serve some useful purpose, a principle that extended from material goods to human effort, and even to time itself. Brother Cuthbert worked steadily at his charter copying, the legal document requiring particular attention to ensure no errors crept into names or numbers. Such mistakes could cause serious complications for the parties involved, and Cuthbert approached the work with commendable diligence. Occasionally, he would pause to verify a figure against a reference document, his lips moving silently as he double-checked his transcription. The afternoon light streamed through the scriptorium windows, warming the chamber and creating patterns on the floor that shifted gradually as the sun moved westward. Oswald completed his pen preparation and decided to practice some decorative techniques while he waited for his next copying assignment. Brother Martin, noticing his intention, offered to demonstrate several border patterns that might prove useful for future manuscripts. The illuminator sketched quick examples on a scrap of parchment, showing how simple geometric patterns could be combined to create pleasing effects. Oswald watched with close attention, his mind absorbing these lessons in design and composition. Martin explained that even modest decoration required understanding of balance and proportion, of knowing when to add elements and when to exercise restraint. Too much decoration overwhelmed the text it was meant to honor, while too little failed to give the sacred words their due beauty. Oswald took up a brush and began practicing the patterns Martin had demonstrated, working on prepared parchment scraps that could be saved for future reference or discarded if his efforts proved unsatisfactory. His hand moved with increasing confidence as he repeated each pattern, the movements becoming more fluid with practice. The work engaged him completely, this exploration of new skills that complemented his established expertise in text copying. Brother Timothy appeared in the doorway carrying a basket of fresh herbs, which he distributed among the scribe's desks. To Oswald he gave a bundle of mint, its scent sharp and refreshing. The herbalist smiled his gentle smile and departed without speaking, respecting the concentration that filled the scriptorium. Oswald tucked the mint into a corner of his workspace where its fragrance could reach him throughout the afternoon, a small gift that enhanced his environment without demanding attention. The practice session with decorative patterns continued until Oswald felt he had grasped the basic principles Martin had demonstrated. He set aside his brush and cleaned it carefully, then returned to examining the vellum sheets he had prepared that morning. Each one met his exacting standards, smooth and pale, ready to receive whatever text the abbot might assign him to copy next. The sight of these prepared sheets, waiting empty, gave him a feeling of pleasant anticipation, like standing at the threshold of a journey not yet begun. The bells for none rang across the monastery grounds, and the three scribes paused in their work to attend the afternoon prayers. The walk to the chapel took them through corridors that had cooled slightly as the day progressed, the thick stone walls releasing their stored warmth gradually. In the chapel, Oswald took his place and sang the psalms with his brothers, his voice blending with theirs in the familiar harmonies they had created through years of singing together. After the service, rather than returning directly to the Scriptorium, Oswald decided to visit the monastery library. He wanted to see how his completed gospel manuscript looked now that it had been bound, and he also wished to browse the collection for inspiration regarding what text he might request to copy next. The library occupied a chamber adjacent to the Scriptorium, its walls lined with shelves holding the accumulated wisdom of centuries. Brother Ambrose, the monastery's librarian, greeted Oswald with a nod as he entered. The elderly monk, 73 years old with a stooped back and hands twisted by age, still maintained his careful stewardship of the collection. He had already received Oswald's gospel manuscript from Brother Martin and had given it a place of honor on a shelf reserved for recently completed works. The leather binding gleamed with newness, and through the slightly open pages, Oswald could glimpse his decorated border with its green vines, blue flowers, and golden accents. Brother Ambrose invited Oswald to examine any manuscripts that interested him, and Oswald moved slowly along the shelves, reading titles and occasionally drawing out a volume to inspect more closely. The library held copies of scripture, commentaries by church fathers, chronicles of monastic history, collections of sermons, books of saints' lives, and texts on theology and philosophy. Each represented countless hours of scribal labor, generations of monks dedicating their lives to preserving and transmitting knowledge. One particular manuscript caught Oswald's attention, a collection of writings by St. Augustine that the library had owned for over a century. The pages showed the wear of frequent consultation, their edges slightly darkened by many hands turning them over the years. Yet the text remained clear and legible, testament to the skill of the long-dead scribe who had copied it. Oswald handled the volume with reverence, aware that he held in his hands the work of a predecessor who had shared his vocation and dedication. Brother Ambrose approached and mentioned that the monastery had recently received a request to copy this very Augustine text for a daughter house that lacked its own copy. Would Oswald be interested in undertaking this project? The work would be substantial, requiring perhaps 6 months or more to complete, but it would serve the important purpose of making these valuable teachings available to another community of monks. Oswald, 41 years old with ink-stained fingers and graying auburn hair, felt immediate interest in this proposal. Augustine's writings were profound and challenging, full of insight into human nature and divine grace. Copying such a text would not only serve practical purposes, but would also allow him to dwell deeply with Augustine's thought, to absorb these teachings through the intimate process of transcribing them letter by letter. He accepted the assignment gratefully, and Brother Ambrose made a note to inform the abbot of this arrangement. Returning to the Scriptorium with the Augustine manuscript, Oswald felt renewed purpose filling him. The brief pause between projects had been useful, allowing him to rest and develop new skills, but now he was ready to return to his primary work. He placed the manuscript on his reading stand and spent the remaining afternoon hours studying its contents, familiarizing himself with Augustine's style and the particular challenges this text would present. The writing was dense and complex, requiring careful attention to parse the intricate arguments and follow the development of ideas across long passages. Yet this complexity attracted rather than daunted Oswald. His years of experience had prepared him for exactly this kind of demanding work, and he looked forward to the mental engagement it would require. The gospel he had just completed had been relatively straightforward in its language and structure, but Augustine would demand more of him, would stretch his capabilities and deepen his understanding. Brother Martin glanced over and remarked that Augustine was an excellent choice for Oswald's next project. The illuminator had copied Augustine texts himself in earlier years and remembered them fondly, both for the intellectual challenge and for the beauty of the prose when Augustine's rhetoric reached its heights. He offered to collaborate on decorative elements if Oswald wished, suggesting that certain passages might benefit from elaborate initial letters or marginal illustrations. Oswald accepted this offer with pleasure, looking forward to continuing his education in illumination while also producing his finest text copying. The combination of challenges excited him, preserving Augustine's complex arguments accurately while also honoring them with appropriate beauty, maintaining his usual standards of precision while also expanding his skills in new directions. The project stretched before him like an open road, its destination clear, but its journey full of discoveries yet to be made. The bells for Vespers arrived, and Oswald marked his place in the Augustine manuscript before setting it aside. The evening service called, and he responded gladly, his body ready for the standing and singing after hours of sitting and studying. In the chapel, the light entered through western windows, painting everything in warm amber tones. The Vespers psalm spoke of evening sacrifices and divine protection through the night, and Oswald sang them with a heart full of gratitude for the day's gifts and anticipation for the work ahead. At the evening meal, Brother Edmund sat beside him as always, and Oswald found himself describing his new copying project in simple terms. The younger monk listened with interest, clearly pleased to see Oswald's enthusiasm for the Augustine text. Edmund mentioned that he had been reading some of Augustine's writings on creation and found them both challenging and inspiring, and the two monks shared a brief conversation about these themes before returning to their meal in companionable silence. After eating, Oswald chose to walk in the cloister, wanting to move his body and breathe fresh air before the night prayers. The evening had grown cool, and he pulled his hood up against the slight chill. Stars had begun appearing in the darkening sky, and he paused to observe them as he often did, these ancient lights that had witnessed countless human lives and would witness countless more. Brother Martin joined him in the cloister, and they walked together for a time, discussing the Augustine project and planning how they might collaborate on its decoration. Martin suggested creating elaborate chapter initials at major divisions in the text, and perhaps marginal notations highlighting particularly important passages. These decorative elements would serve practical purposes while also adding beauty, helping future readers navigate the complex arguments and locate key teachings. The conversation continued until the bells rang for complaint, at which point the two scribes made their way to the chapel for the day's final prayers. The darkness had deepened considerably, and the chapel's interior held only the flickering light of candles. Oswald took his place in the choir and sang the night prayers with his brothers, his voice steady and true. When the service concluded and the great silence descended, he felt deeply peaceful, ready for sleep and the restoration it would bring. In his cell, Oswald prepared for bed with his customary care. His private prayers that night included gratitude for the new Augustine project, for Brother Martin's offer of collaboration, for Brother Ambrose's stewardship of the library, for the continuing rhythm of work and prayer that structured his days. He lay down on his narrow bed and pulled the wool blanket over himself, his body settling into rest with familiar ease. Sleep claimed him swiftly, and he drifted into dreams where words and images blended together, where Augustine's prose took visible form as illuminated letters dancing across pages. The night passed peacefully, and matins came with its summons to prayer. Oswald rose in the darkness, attended the service, and returned to his cell for additional rest until lauds. This pattern had become so deeply ingrained in his life that his body followed it almost automatically, requiring no conscious effort or decision. Dawn arrived with clear skies, the summer warmth growing more pronounced with each passing day. At lauds, Oswald sang the morning psalms with renewed energy, his anticipation for beginning the Augustine project adding brightness to his voice. After breaking his fast with porridge and bread, he made his way to the Scriptorium, eager to begin this new chapter of his work. The chamber welcomed him as always. He settled at his desk, 41 years old, and hummed his plain chant melody while preparing his workspace for the new manuscript. Fresh vellum sheets waited, prepared and ready. His pens were trimmed and organized. The ink sat ready in its horn, properly mixed and at ideal consistency. Everything stood prepared for the work ahead. Oswald opened the Augustine manuscript to its beginning and studied the first passage he would copy. The Latin was elegant and complex, each sentence carefully constructed to carry multiple layers of meaning. He would need to maintain complete concentration to ensure accuracy, but this challenge pleased rather than worried him. This was the work he had trained for, the labor he had chosen, the vocation that gave his life meaning and structure. Brother Martin arrived and settled at his own desk, continuing work on the Book of Hours. Brother Cuthbert entered and took his place, returning to his charter copying. The Scriptorium filled with its familiar atmosphere of focused attention and shared purpose. Oswald took up his pen, dipped it in ink, positioned it carefully at the top of his first fresh sheet of vellum, and began to write the opening words of Augustine's text. His ink-stained fingers guided the pen with practiced precision. Each letter emerged in proper form. Each word followed its predecessor in correct sequence. The work had begun, and it would continue day after day, week after week, month after month, until this substantial text had been fully transcribed and preserved for another generation of readers. Oswald felt complete contentment as he worked, knowing himself to be exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The morning light strengthened and moved across his desk, warming the vellum beneath his hands. His pen traveled steadily across the page, leaving its trail of precise letters. The Augustine text unfolded word by word, idea by idea, carrying forward the wisdom of a saint who had lived and written 800 years earlier. Oswald served as a link in the chain connecting past to future, preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost, ensuring that Augustine's insights would continue to instruct and inspire long after Oswald himself had passed from this world. This thought brought him not sadness but deep satisfaction. His work would outlast him, would serve purposes he might never know, would touch lives he would never meet. This was enough, more than enough. It was everything. His pen continued its steady movement across the page, and the Scriptorium held him in its peaceful embrace, and another day of meaningful labor unfolded in the timeless rhythm that had sustained monks and scholars for centuries. Oswald, 41 years old, worked with complete attention and profound gratitude, his life devoted to a purpose that transcended individual existence and connected him to something eternal. The hours passed in their measured way, and the work continued, and all was exactly as it should be. The morning progressed through its familiar stages as Oswald copied Augustine's opening passages onto fresh vellum. The Latin philosopher's words required careful attention, each sentence constructed with deliberate complexity that rewarded close reading. Oswald found himself pausing occasionally, not from uncertainty about transcription, but from genuine engagement with the ideas being expressed. Augustine wrote of memory and time, of the human soul's capacity to hold past and present simultaneously, and these reflections resonated with Oswald's own experience of monastic life, where ancient patterns repeated endlessly, yet each day arrived new. Brother Martin worked quietly at his illumination, occasionally humming fragments of hymns that drifted through the Scriptorium like gentle reminders of their shared devotional life. The sounds created a pleasant backdrop to concentration rather than disturbing it. Brother Cuthbert's pen scratched steadily at his charter work, adding its own rhythm to the chamber's acoustic texture. The three monks worked in harmony without needing to coordinate consciously, their individual labors somehow supporting and enhancing one another. By mid-morning, Oswald had completed several substantial sections of the Augustine text. His hand maintained its characteristic steadiness despite the demanding nature of the material. The philosopher's arguments unfolded across the page in neat columns of script, each letter properly formed, each word correctly spelled. Oswald's years of training allowed him to maintain accuracy even while engaging intellectually with the content. His hand working with such practiced automaticity that his mind could attend to meaning without sacrificing precision. The bells rang for a long time, and the scribes set aside their work to attend the mid-morning prayers. The walk to the chapel took them through sun-warmed corridors, and Oswald noticed how the quality of light had changed over recent weeks as spring gave way to summer. The angle of illumination through windows had shifted, and the warmth penetrated more deeply into the stone walls. These gradual seasonal transitions marked time in ways that transcended the daily ringing of bells, connecting the monastery to larger cycles of growth and harvest, light and darkness. In the chapel, Oswald stood in his customary place and sang the psalms with his brothers. His voice had grown stronger over recent days, perhaps responding to his renewed sense of purpose with the Augustine project. Brother Edmund's voice rose nearby, and they found their occasional harmonies with increasing frequency, as if their friendship had found expression in these musical alignments. When the service concluded, Oswald felt refreshed and ready to return to his copying work. The Scriptorium welcomed him back with its familiar atmosphere. He settled at his desk, 41 years old with graying auburn hair and ink-stained fingers, and resumed his place in the Augustine text. The philosopher had moved from discussing memory to exploring the nature of confession, of speaking truth about oneself before God and community. These themes felt particularly relevant to monastic life, where humility and honest self-examination formed essential practices. Brother Timothy appeared in the doorway carrying his basket of herbs, this time distributing small bundles of lavender among the scribes. The clean scent filled the scriptorium as each monk tucked the gift into his workspace. Oswald breathed deeply of the fragrance, feeling it clear his mind and sharpen his concentration. Brother Timothy moved through the chamber with his characteristic quietness, offering his gifts without expectation of acknowledgement, then departing to continue his rounds through other parts of the monastery. The morning stretched toward midday as Oswald's pen traveled steadily across the vellum. Augustine's prose possessed a rhythmic quality that Oswald found increasingly engaging, long-flowing sentences that built momentum through careful accumulation of phrases and clauses. Copying such writing required maintaining awareness of the overall structure, even while attending to individual words, ensuring that punctuation preserved the intended meaning, and that line breaks didn't disrupt the flow of thought. A visiting scholar from the cathedral arrived at the scriptorium accompanied by Brother Ambrose. The librarian was showing the visitor some of the monastery's more notable manuscripts, and they paused at Brother Martin's desk to admire the illuminator's work on the Book of Hours. The scholar, a learned man with thoughtful eyes and weathered hands that spoke of long years spent with books, offered generous praise for the beauty and precision of Martin's decorations. Brother Ambrose then led the visitor to Oswald's desk and explained that this scribe had recently completed a gospel manuscript and was now beginning work on an Augustine text. The scholar examined Oswald's work with evident appreciation, noting the exceptional clarity of his script and the careful accuracy of his transcription. He remarked that such faithful copying served an invaluable purpose in preserving and transmitting the Church's intellectual heritage, and that scribes like Oswald deserved recognition for their essential contributions to learning. Oswald felt warmth rising in his chest at this praise, not from pride, but from gratitude that his work was seen and valued by someone whose judgment he respected. He thanked the scholar with simple sincerity, then returned his attention to his copying as the visitor and Brother Ambrose continued their tour of the scriptorium. The brief interruption had been pleasant rather than disruptive, a reminder that his labor connected him to a larger community of scholars and seekers spread across many monasteries and cathedral schools. The bells for sext rang at midday, and the scribes paused their work to attend the noon prayers. The chapel held accumulated warmth from the morning sun, and the gathered monks' voices seemed to rise with particular clarity in the heated air. Oswald sang the psalms with full attention, his mind still partially occupied with Augustine's arguments about confession and grace, finding in the ancient Hebrew poetry echoes of themes the philosopher had explored in his own writing. The midday meal consisted of pottage made with barley and early summer vegetables, thick and nourishing. Oswald ate slowly, chewing thoroughly, allowing the food to properly sustain his body for the afternoon's work. Brother Edmund sat beside him, and the younger monk mentioned that he had been gathering medicinal herbs in preparation for winter, when fresh plants would be unavailable. His voice carried quiet satisfaction at having completed this important seasonal task, ensuring the infirmary would have necessary remedies through the cold months ahead. After the meal, Oswald returned to the Scriptorium feeling thoroughly nourished and ready for sustained concentration. The afternoon hours were often his most productive, when morning's warm-up had prepared his hand and mind for peak performance. He settled at his desk and took up his pen with renewed energy, finding his place in the Augustine text and continuing the careful transcription. The philosopher's writing had moved into more abstract territory now, discussing the nature of time itself and how the human mind experienced past, present, and future. Augustine argued that time existed primarily in consciousness, that past and future had no independent reality outside of memory and anticipation. Oswald found these ideas both challenging and fascinating, and he slowed his copying pace slightly to ensure he fully grasped the arguments being presented. Brother Martin rose to mix fresh pigments, and the sounds of his preparation created gentle punctuation to the afternoon's quiet. The scraping of pestle against mortar, the soft pouring of binding medium, the light clink of brush handles against ceramic jars. These noises formed a familiar symphony that Oswald found deeply soothing. The illuminator was experimenting with a new shade of purple, trying to achieve exactly the right balance between red and blue to match, a vision he had conceived for the Book of Hours. Oswald completed another page of the Augustine text and paused to examine his work. The script maintained its consistent quality, each letter properly formed, spacing even throughout. The intellectual difficulty of the material had not compromised the physical execution of his copying. This ability to maintain technical excellence while engaging deeply with challenging content represented the fruit of his many years of practice, and he felt quiet satisfaction at seeing evidence of his mastered craft. His ink-stained fingers flexed briefly before taking up the pen again. The afternoon light had begun its slow descent, though the full evening remained hours away. Summer days stretched long, providing abundant working hours, and Oswald intended to make full use of this gift of extended daylight. He dipped his pen and resumed copying, Augustine's complex sentences flowing onto the vellum in steady progression. Brother Cuthbert completed his charter and began preparing materials for his next assignment. The young scribe had been asked to copy a collection of sermons for use in the monastery's chapter house, where readings were given during community gatherings. He arranged fresh vellum on his desk and opened the original manuscript, settling into the familiar rhythm of preparation that preceded all copying work. The Scriptorium held its 3 workers in comfortable companionship, each absorbed in individual tasks, yet aware of the other's presence in ways that enhanced rather than disturbed concentration. This quality of shared solitude represented one of monastic life's great gifts, the ability to be simultaneously alone and together, to work in silence that felt full rather than empty. Augustine's text continued its exploration of time, moving toward conclusions about divine eternity existing outside temporal flow. The philosopher argued that God experienced all moments simultaneously, that what humans perceived as past, present, and future existed for God as eternal present. Oswald copied these passages with particular care, sensing their theological importance and wanting to ensure future readers would receive them in their full precision. The afternoon progressed through imperceptible stages toward evening. Light moved across the scriptorium floor, shadows lengthened, and temperature began its gradual decline from the day's peak warmth. Oswald worked steadily, page after page of Augustine's dense prose taking form beneath his pen. The work satisfied him deeply. This combination of physical craft and intellectual engagement, of preserving ancient wisdom while also wrestling with its meaning. Brother Martin completed his purple pigment preparation and began applying it to his manuscript, creating elaborate decorations around a passage of evening prayers. The color had turned out beautifully, exactly the shade he had envisioned, and his satisfied hum confirmed his pleasure with the result. Oswald glanced over occasionally to watch his friend's skilled hands applying color with precise control, always learning from these observations even as he focused primarily on his own work. The bells for none arrived, and the 3 scribes paused to attend the afternoon prayers. In the chapel, the service unfolded with its customary grace, the monks' voices rising in familiar psalms that connected this moment to countless others stretching back through centuries. Oswald, 41 years old, sang with particular awareness of continuity and tradition, themes that Augustine's writing had brought freshly to his consciousness. After the service, rather than returning immediately to the scriptorium, Oswald decided to visit the monastery garden. His body needed movement after long hours of sitting, and his mind would benefit from brief engagement with the natural world. He made his way to the cultivated plots where Brother Timothy tended vegetables and herbs, finding the gardener at work among rows of beans that had grown substantially over recent weeks. Brother Timothy looked up as Oswald approached, his face showing pleased surprise at this visit. The 2 monks stood together examining the garden's progress, Timothy pointing out particular plants that were thriving or struggling, explaining adjustments he had made to watering or positioning. His knowledge of plants was extensive and deeply practical, learned through years of careful observation and patient experimentation. Oswald listened with genuine interest, appreciating both the information Timothy shared and the obvious love the gardener brought to his work. Every vocation in the monastery served an important purpose, and Timothy's skill with growing things ensured the community had fresh food and medicinal herbs throughout the seasons. They walked together through the garden paths, and Oswald felt grateful for this brief interlude. This reminder that the world held many forms of valuable knowledge and many ways of serving well. When he returned to the scriptorium, Oswald felt refreshed and ready to continue his copying work. The brief break had been exactly what he needed, allowing his body to move and his mind to rest before engaging again with Augustine's demanding prose. He settled at his desk and took up his pen, finding his place in the text and resuming the careful transcription. The afternoon drew toward evening through gradual degrees of changing light. Oswald completed several more pages, bringing his total for the day to a satisfying number. The Augustine project would be long, but he had made a solid beginning, establishing the rhythm and concentration that would carry him through the months ahead. His hand felt strong and steady, capable of sustaining this work indefinitely. Brother Martin began cleaning his brushes in preparation for Vespers, and Brother Cuthbert did the same with his pen. The three scribes performed these end-of-day tasks with the same care they brought to actual copying, knowing that proper tool maintenance ensured consistent quality. Oswald cleaned his own pen thoroughly, covered his ink horn, and arranged his workspace for easy resumption the following morning. The bells for Vespers rang, calling them to evening prayers. In the chapel, the service took place in rich golden light that entered through western windows, painting everything with warm radiance. Oswald sang the evening psalms with his brothers, his voice blending with theirs in harmonies worn smooth by endless repetition. Brother Edmund stood nearby, and their voices found alignment several times, creating brief moments of perfect concord. At the evening meal, the brothers were served fresh bread and cheese with early strawberries from the garden, small and intensely sweet. Oswald savored each berry, grateful for this seasonal gift. Brother Edmund sat beside him, and they ate in companionable silence, the younger monk's quiet presence continuing to provide its gentle comfort. When the meal ended, Oswald felt thoroughly satisfied, his body properly nourished and his spirit at peace. After eating, he spent his free time in the warming room, though tonight no fire burned in the hearth given the summer warmth. Several brothers had gathered to talk quietly about various matters, news from the visitor earlier, plans for upcoming feast days, small observations about daily life. Oswald listened more than he spoke, content to be part of this gentle fellowship without needing to dominate conversation. The bells for Compline arrived, and the gathered monks made their way to the chapel for the night's final prayers. Darkness had not yet fully claimed the sky, summer twilight lingering long past what winter would allow. In the chapel, the Compline service unfolded with its familiar prayers of protection and rest. Oswald sang with his brothers, his voice steady and true, his heart full of gratitude for the day's gifts. After the service, the great silence descended, and Oswald made his way to his cell. He prepared for sleep with his customary care, his private prayers including thanksgiving for the successful beginning of the Augustine project, for the refreshing garden visit with Brother Timothy, for the continuing rhythms of work and prayer that structured his days. He lay down and pulled the light summer blanket over himself, his body settling easily into rest. Sleep came quickly, and he drifted into peaceful darkness unmarked by dreams or disturbance. The night passed in its appointed way, and matins arrived with its summons to prayer. Oswald rose in the pre-dawn darkness and made his way to the chapel, where the service unfolded in candlelight and shadow. After matins, he returned to his cell and slept again until lauds, this pattern so deeply ingrained that his body followed it without conscious thought. Dawn broke clear and beautiful, promising another fine summer day. At Lauds, Oswald sang the morning psalms with renewed energy, his voice strong after the night's rest. After breaking his fast, he made his way to the Scriptorium, eager to continue his work on the Augustine manuscript, ready for another day of patient copying, of preserving wisdom, of participating in the great ongoing conversation that stretched across centuries and connected countless souls in shared pursuit of truth and beauty. The Scriptorium welcomed him as it always did, and he settled at his desk, 41 years old with ink-stained fingers and graying auburn hair, and hummed his plain chant melody while preparing to write. And the work continued as it had and would, day after day, in the endless peaceful rhythm that gave his life its meaning and his hours their purpose.